Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Risk Matrix with James Junkin.
Roll Tide. It's gonna be
Okay,
okay.
he's got the Roll Tide in there, and I'm Dr. Martin, and today we have with us a guru. He doesn't want to be called that, but a guru of procurement and supply chain, Sam Rayborn, and he works for Veriforce. And we're going to be talking about how safety works with procurement or doesn't work with procurement, and how we can do better, because it's in our best interest for both of us departments to kind of get things straightened out. But before we go into that, we've got a sponsor today. This episode of the Risk Matrix, powered by Veriforce, is sponsored by Columbia Southern University. Columbia Southern University has quickly become the university of choice for safety professionals, risk and environmental management, and emergency management professionals. Columbia Southern University offers online educational experience with classes taught by some of the leading educators in their respective fields. The CSU Occupational Safety and Health degree program is accepted by the Board of Certified Safety Professionals as a qualifier for the CSP and ASP exams. CSU offers associate, bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees, as well as certificate programs in both undergraduate and graduate programs. All programs are geared toward the working professional and specifically designed for adult learners. Members of the Veriforce Network can receive up to 10% off tuition expenses and free e-textbooks when enrolling. Visit veriforcenetwork.com/offers/Columbia-Southern-University for details about how to enroll. There you go,
Well,
James.
welcome, Sam. You're in the Matrix, baby.
Excellent.
Congratulations. And congratulations on your position there at Veriforce as Director of Procurement and Supply Chain. You know, Dr. Martin and I are safety professionals, and you are a supply chain guru and professional. And sometimes these two groups don't always get along, do they, Sam?
No, I've had my fair share of friction between the HSE professionals. Yes.
So I think all of us have the same goal of getting workers home safe from high hazard jobs, which is Veriforce's mission, ought to be everybody's mission, right? But
Yeah,
we sort of understand what that means for us as safety professionals, but what does that mean to a procurement professional?
Well, I think you might find this surprising that we're not that far from being completely aligned on it. I think the issue is we've siloed ourselves so much in our individual groups where we have our own specific goals. For instance, procurement supply chain tends to have mostly goals focused on financial metrics, cost savings, and HSE is focused on safety. The two should not be, one of my biggest pet peeves is the two should not be as far apart as they are. I look at risk overall to back to the title of your program is really total cost management, right? It's how do we manage all the costs in an organization, which to me equate to the word risk. And I think by us getting, going back to the old Ford or Deming or one of those guys that have really perfected segregating a workforce so you can create so much more efficiencies, what we've done is we've so far segregated ourselves that we're not connected at the top line enough. So we're all pulling on the rope. We're just not pulling on the rope together. We're actually, if you've ever looked at a star where you've got a star where everybody's pulling on a rope in a different direction, well, you're not moving the organization. If we can get on the same rope, we can pull together and we can move that movable object. I've just seen it too often where we have our own independent goals, which ultimately are the same, but we're all operating in our own silo. So I don't know. I'm very passionate about this. It's something I've seen in my 25 years or so. I hate to say 25 years, but it's been 25 years of time in this procurement and supply chain business that I fell into by accident. But it's been a constant theme. Friction is not always bad, but friction, especially between HSE and procurement, is unnecessary friction.
So I'm so glad that you mentioned Ford and I think you mentioned Deming too, right?
Sure.
And I saw James kind of smirk a little bit, smile or smirk or whatever he did. And these are not foreign people to us as safety professionals because we learn about efficiency, productivity, cost because they are a part of safety, right? I think what happens, and this is just as my opinion, right? We get so focused on bringing workers home safe from high hazard jobs, right? And we get focused on our own little pigeonhole of that whole interworking gear system that we forget that it has to be a balance, right? There has to be a balance. And risk tolerance is not always the same for every company. Okay? And risk tolerance has to take into account these other disciplines, right?
Yep.
I want you to procure the safest contractor. You want to procure the safest contractor, but you also want to control cost, productivity, and efficiency. I understand that. But how do I get out of that mentality that doesn't allow me to remember those lessons that I've learned?
You know, I think that was a question. I think it was.
Yeah,
I
it was.
have a very simple answer for that. We stop, and this is going to be very controversial, and I apologize because my dog is in the room with me, and my wife just got home. So
Hey, we like dogs and we like controversy. This is risk matrix, baby.
That's right.
and I was at risk of him starting to howl if I did not let him out because he wants to be with his mother. Um, so I think this is a very simple but controversial answer, and that is we have got to stop thinking about the quarter and start thinking about the business as a whole and how the business is run over the long term. Because what we've got is we've got internal pressures to save price or cost in a short window of operation. But to build a safe environment, you've got to think of the long term. And to build the best supply chain, you have to think of the long term. But our individual verticals are sometimes for all the right reasons, because we're focused on the quarter, are incentivized to create short-term savings that doesn't look at long-term effects of that cost savings. For instance, some of my time in the oil patch, we were always focused on getting we wanted to use US steel on pipe, downhole pipe, but we also wanted to get the cheapest price. And so you found those two pressures didn't always line up. To get the cheapest pipe, sometimes you had to get it from South Korea. And yeah, sometimes it was probably not up to standard. And it all worked great until it didn't. And then, James, you were telling me a story about some costs that had to be incurred due to poor vendor selection or vendors maybe not being as safe as they needed to be. Well, we see that in the procurement world every day, where using this example of the downhole pipe, maybe the specification was just slightly off and the tensile strength wasn't there for the type of strata we were going into, and then it broke. And then what were the costs for that? Right. And so it's these unexpected costs that I like to call risk. As long as everybody at the top line understands that these risks are real risks and they're going to affect the bottom line somewhere else, then I've got an old procurement adage. It's called sign here, right? If you're willing to take on that risk, sign here, right? But it's my job to make sure you're aware of those risks. But when it comes to people's lives, that's a risk that we need to be in lockstep on, because there's not $1 million or $1 billion that's worth somebody losing a finger or losing their life over someone's quarter goals. So until we stop thinking about the quarter goal and start thinking about the long-term effects cost, then I think we're always going to have that friction.
I think one of the challenges for safety professionals is many really don't understand the concept of risk, and they want to reduce risk to zero. there is never a reduction to zero. There is no such thing as zero risk, and there is a such a thing as an acceptable risk. Organizations do not have unlimited resources. You know, we're not the government where we can just go out and print money, right? So we have to balance, particularly in the supply chain, but with what we're willing to accept as risk when compared to whatever the regulation is, for example. Obviously, if there's a law that prevents us from exposing workers to certain hazards above a permissible exposure limit or something of that nature, for example, then we have to adhere to that. That is a cost of doing business and cost of compliance. But in many other areas, I find that safety professionals really want to reduce everything to zero without any type of consideration of how much cost is associated with doing so, when we could say, okay, we can tolerate this amount of risk based on the likelihood and severity of the consequence of exposure. Now, those are terms safety professionals are familiar with, but I don't know they really understand it. So here's my question to you. How many organizations have you run through, Sam, that have a comprehensive risk register that in the hiring process, when they're looking down into the supply chain, say, okay, we've got HSE risk. We also have, you know, and a lot of times with safety professionals, we say HSE, but we just mean HS because not many of us know anything about the E part of it, right? It's just kind of hanging out there on the end. And Dr. Martin's laughing because she knows exactly what I'm saying is true, right? But we got environmental risk, there's financial risk, you know, there's loss of business reputation risk, there's risk to in publicly traded companies to diminishing shareholder returns, or all these risks. So back to the question, how many companies really have a comprehensive risk register where all parties, both procurement and safety, can understand each other's perspectives?
I think this, and I don't like going on record on this. I have worked for some very, very large companies, some very large retailers, if you will, that have a very large global footprint that I will not name here. I would say they all think they have one. They like to pretend they have one, but because they check the box, if you will, but because their communication is so poor across the verticals, they don't have any way of truly executing on it. What do I mean by that? I mean, they might have a procurement professional collecting all this information. Is the information truly being vetted by the safety professional? Is the information truly being validated by the environmental group? The answer to that is, in every instance that I've seen, no. Is it been attempted? Yes. Define attempt is kind of my question. It's how are they checking the box to say they're checking the box, or are they truly looking at it? In my experience, most of them are just trying to stay compliant, and they're not actually looking at the problem. And a lot of that could be solved with, you know, in my opinion, there are 3 rules to successfully conduct any business. And number 1, it's communicate. Number 2 is communicate. And number 3 is communicate. And how we do that in each one of those particular points of the word communication is a little bit different. 1 is make aware. 2 is validate and verify. And 3 is really, back to Deming, make sure that everybody heard the message and that we correct those actions if they're not hearing that message. And I think that's where things break down, is the failure. My favorite movie, what we have here is a failure to communicate.
Yeah. So I'm gonna throw something in there, and it's probably gonna give James flashbacks, because James is going through his doctoral program, and he just took a course on integrated management systems. Okay. And the basis of integrated management systems is we have ISO for quality, right? We've got ISO for safety, we've got ISO for environmental health, and integrating those systems is a big part of that communication step, right? Creating the processes that everybody uses, right? That everybody has opinions into, the meetings, the communication, all of those things, so that when you have a risk register or when you are assessing procurement, right? That everybody has kind of the same process to look at something, and it might not always be, for me, with the safety management system, an ISO, ISO 45001 safety management system, it might be within your quality for procurement, right? And so I'm going to throw this to James, right? James, do you think I'm far off on that? That part of this might be the integration of management
I think
systems where
you're
we missed the
exactly
boat?
right, because oftentimes what I found in my studies was you have companies with different ISO programs, but they're all in isolation. They don't communicate with each other. So you have inefficiencies within the organization, and therefore the feedback loops are internal to that particular safety management system and not across the business unit. So if I'm over here in safety, all I think about safety, right? I don't think about production and quality, or even in some cases the environmental aspects. So I really like the idea of breaking that down, which also helps, I think, in the communication factors between safety professionals and procurement. Now, here's where the rub meets the road sometimes, Sam, from the safety standpoint. We got a problem with a contractor. We know the contractor's struggling with safety. The contractor might barely meet the minimum qualifications of a third-party verification system, but their performance in the field is suspect. We want to stop the job on that particular vendor, but procurement says, we don't have anybody else to do this job. We're willing to take the risk, put them back to work.
So to me, that's a fundamental breakdown in the procurement team's ability to do their job, right? And that is this: we're in a big world. I think I said in a meeting the other day, there are what, 9 billion people on the planet? For me to only have one supplier that can do something is a failure of me in a procurement team. As a rule of thumb, I learned this from a very old procurement guy. He lives in Baton Rouge, right near you. He said, you got to have three. You got to have your primary, your secondary, and your oh shit. Excuse my language. But you have to have three. And that oh shit guy needs, you're going to pay premium for that guy. He's not getting your primary amount of business. He might be getting 10, 15% of your business. But you have to mitigate your risk of failure by not having a supplier that can deliver a certain good or service. If you don't have that, that is a fundamental breakdown. And I think that can be avoided. But again, there are lots of pressures from different angles on the procurement folks to move to a strategic sourcing model where you own or sole source agreement, because that sole source might be a multinational company. Well, sometimes the hardest, sometimes the vendor that's been the hardest to perform is some of the biggest in the world. I've worked with Big Blue. I've worked with the Baker Hugheses of the world. They're big, beautiful companies, but based on basin to basin, they might not be as good in one basin as it is in another basin. But when you sign national sole source agreements with them, you're stuck with them in the UNTA, right? But they might not be performing. We've got to have a supply chain group that has got the strength and the fortitude to do the right thing and to work in partnership with that safety group. And there's a picture that I've got up on my screen right now, which I could share it with you guys, about a big elephant. And what do you see, right? It's perspective. We have to change our perspective to fit that of the supply or the safety guys and the risk guys, depending on how big your organization is, because now you end up having verticals all over the place, right? We have to find a way to communicate our version of the truth so that we can get our needs met without sacrificing the needs of others. And a lot of that goes to just failure to really perform basic blocking and tackling, which is, in the example you gave, 3 vendors, right? Even if that guy's going to cost 8 times as much. I learned early in my career in the oil patch, sometimes saving $10 cost me 10 million, right? If that boat doesn't get there or that wellhead goes down, guess what? I had to learn that the hard way, but I learned it.
So let me ask you this, right? In the safety world, if we're looking at vendors, so it depends on the size of the company, right?
Sure.
We might say we want to use X, Y, and Z, right? Here are your three, right? Here's your primary, your secondary, and your oh shit. Okay. And we hand them to you. I'm not sure that's the right method, right? Because the way that you're talking is procurement should have a major hand in selecting those vendors, and not so much the safety professional driving the bus as to who they want or who they think is the safest.
I keep quoting Deming. The process drives the bus, not the owner. And the process should be such that if I'm needing to bring vendors in, depending on the risk of that vendor, right? We're not talking, a paperclip vendor, right?
Right.
We're talking about a vendor that could put you, sitting on a well, 500 miles out in the Gulf, right? Depending on the complexity of the project and complexity of the type of vendor, it needs to be a partnership from the inception. When I'm going out searching for vendors, I need to understand the safety protocols that need to be put in place at the beginning of the process, not at the end of the process. Too many times the procurement folks go out, and I'm going to poke a hole in the procurement people. They're told to go find some vendors for an upcoming project. They're the ones not properly engaging with the safety team. Heck, they might not even properly engage with the engineering team. A lot of procurement professionals feel like they're engineers or they feel like they're safety guys. And I've preached to my teams ever since I learned it the hard way. I'm not a safety guy. I know a lot about safety. I'm not a safety guy. I know a lot about engineering just from exposure. I'm not an engineer. Bring the engineers, bring the safety guys, bring the right people to the discussion at the beginning of the process so that you can spec this out properly. Well, then do your work as a procurement professional and then have final say with that initial group or that same group. Here's my 3-4 suggestions. Here's the price. Here's the risk. Here's the indirect stuff. They're in Billings, Montana, as opposed to the Gulf of Mexico. How do you want to make your choice? And then it's the sign here as a team. We vetted these guys together. They met all of the criteria. Just like a good compromise, they might not have met every compromise or every item that's safety needed, but they were good enough. And they might not have met every cost, but they're good enough. We compromise on a decision based on collective thought. That's what I'm seeing not done enough because we're always in a rush. Hurry up and get that vendor.
Well, I'll tell you something else to echo that. And we've not done a good job in safety in this. Pre-qualification is not qualification.
Correct.
Okay. I likened it to going and getting my driver's license. Okay. The state of Alabama says that I have met the minimum standards to operate a motor vehicle, and I passed a one little test with the state trooper where I was on my best behavior. We're signaling and all that. But it doesn't mean that I'm ever going to have those safe driving practices after that. And I liken that to pre-qualification. So pre-qualification is necessary. It's done a lot of good things. Veriforce has been outstanding in pre-qualifying contractors. It's helped reduce incident rates. It's done a lot of positives to the industry by being able to coalesce around one standardized safety questionnaire and all those other benefits. But that doesn't tell me exactly how they're going to drive their safety program moving forward. So safety is always evolving. Yep. And I think being able to have that communication back from the safety professionals and saying, look, we're in a situation here where we may have unacceptable risk to us, not safety, not procurement, the entire organization. Because guess who gets sued? Safety don't get sued. Procurement doesn't get sued. The company gets sued. And that's the largest indirect cost I think organizations have is this cost, hidden cost of what litigation could potentially be in a given situation based on injuries, fatalities, damage to the environment, damage to other assets, etc. So given that situation, many times I deal with procurement as a consultant, and they have this philosophy, and it's probably informed by their in-house counsel, is we hire a contractor, we hear no evil, we see no evil, we speak no evil. I don't want to know too much about how they do it. I don't want to know how the sausage is made. I don't care if they do JHAs, whether they have permits to go in confined spaces. That's why we hire contractors. The less we know, the better we are. What's your response to that approach?
Scares the bejesus out of me because I've seen it 100 times. Sign here. Back to my favorite print. You're willing to sign our MSA? It scares the hell out of me. I slide an MSA across the desk to somebody and they just sign it and send it back.
Yeah.
If they don't redline anything, that is usually a telltale sign to really pay attention to that vendor. If everything is perfect, because I learned this in the Army. I think you were in the Navy, that it's not what we do on our best days that we get judged. It's what we do on our worst days.
Right.
Everybody has a mistake. Everybody's going to have a safety issue. Everybody's going to miss a load. Everybody's going to have a problem. What are we going to do with it when we have those? How do we react to it? Some of my best vendors had major failures. What did they do when they failed? That's how I like to judge a vendor. Do I want them to fail? No. Do I want it when they do fail? I want them to fail small, right? I don't want them to fail big.
Feel safe.
Yeah, and fail safe, right? Right? Fail safe. I mean, people are going to drop a wrench, right? It's going to happen. So at the end of the day, though, to answer your question, is we in the procurement world tend, and my procurement friends and family that are hearing this are probably going to want to throttle me. We tend to, once we get the signature, we're out. Meaning they signed the MSA, somebody validated their insurance, we're out. That is the wrong team attitude. If we are working on this together, it starts with they're willing to sign our MSA. They're willing to produce their insurance. They're willing to be vetted, whatever vetting that needs to happen from a safety standpoint. But like you said, James, once I get from behind the wheel of the car with the DPS officer who gave me my license, how do I perform on the road? And that's where procurement, specifically, we're talking about vendor management, and depending on the size of your organization, you may not have a way to have vendor management, right? But the vendor management still needs to occur, and that is quarterly reviews that brings our safety person in with their safety, our engineer in with their engineer, our pricing and AP folks with their pricing and AP folks. And then we have an agenda, and we start out with, how is the invoicing going? It's going terrible. Let's poke holes. Let's shake hands. Let's get in a fight. Let's end it. Let's move forward. Now let's talk about the safety guys. Well, you had 3 incidents, How are we going to mitigate that? And then I'm going to show, if I'm a vendor manager, all those components I will have been tracking, and I'm going to give a scorecard and say, you're an F vendor for me, right? It didn't say an F safety vendor. It didn't say an F operational vendor. It didn't say an F safe AP vendor. It said an F vendor. All of those, you might have made an A in safety, but you're still an F vendor, right? You might have been an A, an F in safety, and an A everywhere else. Based on my weights, at safety maybe 70% of the equation, you're an F vendor. How do we then mitigate that? How do we then take, just like your 12-year-old in school, how do we get you tutorials to get you caught up, or do we have to fire you?
So I got 2 questions, and they're loaded questions, I think. The first question is, you're telling us a lot about procurement, right? And as safety professionals, I would like to know what we should be expecting from our procurement officers, right? You just said a process that I've seen in practice at a large company, and it works. Okay, so what should we expect from our procurement, even at the smallest level, small mid-sized companies, right? And I think that that's follow through, but you can change that answer if you want. But then the second is, I kind of do want to know how the sausage is made. And so when you mention giving somebody an F, an overall F, right? Not just a safety F or a cost F or whatever. How do you come up with the criteria as a procurement officer or a procurement department of when they get an F and when they get an A, right? Because somebody's got to make that subjective call or that collective call to determine what it's going to be. And is it you as procurement, or is it all of us?
Can I
Well-
interject real quick before you answer that, Sam? It just depends, Dr. Martin.
I love that.
That's her favorite
I
phrase.
love that.
Go
It
ahead,
just
Sam.
depends.
I
It
couldn't
just
resist.
depends.
Say that.
I'm just saying, should we depend on procurement for everything?
For the record, I wasn't going to say it depends. I was going to say situation dictates.
Okay,
Yeah.
same thing.
All right. So, first question first. What should you expect from us? I think I'm going to answer question number 2, or answer question number 1 when I answer question number 2. Again, my procurement folks that are hearing this, please don't send me hate mail. Procurement does not drive any of the ships. We don't drive the boat. We don't drive the tank. We facilitate all of the various drivers. If we're doing our jobs, nobody knows we exist. First and foremost. And how does that happen? We're like coaches. We bring all of these people together. And at the end of the day, what I want to do is, if I've got a large vendor that I want to manage, I come up with a scorecard based on, James, we were just on a conference call. What did I walk away with? I said, I'll create the spreadsheet. I've got some samples. I'm going to go out and say, safety guys, you give me your criterion and how you're going to score them. Then I go to my engineers, give me your safety ideas or your ideas on performance, and I'm going to score them. I'm going to collect all that information. I'm going to put it in a blended scorecard, and then we're going to circle back up, or if we don't have time, I'm going to go, here's my recommendation on how we score these guys. All those say aye. It's a collective decision. So that's how I'm going to manage that vendor. Again, I love to see the sausage made. I like to think I'm a shade tree engineer, man. I can build anything. I love to think I'm a shade tree, this, that, and the other. But I am not. I didn't go and get a PE certificate. I'm not an engineer. I'm going to rely on them to teach me how to make the sausage, but I'm never going to actually get the privilege of making their sausage. But I know what I know is wrong when I see it's wrong, or at least I can go, something doesn't smell right. Engineer, come take a look at this, right?
Well, when it comes to sausage, you don't want it to smell wrong. And I just want to make a comment here and say, James does want to know how the sausage is made. He lies. He likes to know how the sausage is made. He likes to know, he's curious about the process, right? And that makes us good as whatever part of the process we are, right? You should want to know how the sausage is made, because you can't work as a team if you don't understand the trials and tribulations of everybody else involved.
Well, we like to say this, and I know our time's waning, and you said some things. You say, I hope I don't get any hate mail about it. I'm going to get hate mail about this, and I don't care. Okay? Safety is not number one. It's never been number one. It's not going to be number one. The people that say it's number one don't understand the nature of business. Our output is not safety. Okay? Unless you own a safety company, your output's not safety. You're not selling safety, but it is equal to production and quality. They all go together. You've been in procurement for 25 years, Sam. Tell me, a company that's unsafe, do they also have production and quality issues?
Thank you.
Every time.
It's a symptom. If you've got one symptom, you typically have them all.
So it all goes together. And I think my big takeaway from this, it takes a team.
It is a team.
Us communicating with procurement communicating with us communicating expectations to the contractor, us letting you know, hey, Sam, we've got this problem. I'm not saying we got to stop work, but we need to work with this contractor before we have a catastrophe. Too many times, everybody wants to sit around the table after an incident happens and say, I need a corrective action plan and a root cause analysis and all this stuff, when the precursors of that incident happened way before. Everybody saw this coming, but no one did anything. And now that puts you in a jam. You've got to go to that second supplier and maybe get them on the job, or we're putting together corrective action plans under the gun to get back to work. Nobody's following up on it to see whether those corrective action plans are aptly implemented, whether the implementation of those corrective action plans actually address the issue. Do we need to change speed? You know, back to dimming. And it's funny, Sam, you mentioned dimming. Dimming's the basis of a lot of things we do in safety. That plan, do, check, act, PDCA philosophy of continuous improvement is integrated in the safety management system. So my takeaway from this is, let's talk, let's have good communication, let's be involved in the procurement process, but also you involved in telling us what the expectations are for the vendor, because you see all the risk. Let's understand as safety professionals the other risks than just safety that's involved in this. That risk cannot be mitigated to zero, but we can have some acceptable risk within the supply chain.
When we work together.
When we work together. All right, Sam, you are the Director of Procurement and Supply Chain for Veriforce. If people wanted to get in touch with you to learn a little bit more about procurement and supply chain issues and how Veriforce can be a solution for some of the problems that they may be experiencing, how would they get in touch with you?
You can email me directly at sam.rayborn@veriforce.com. You can connect to me on LinkedIn, Samuel Rayborn. Just look me up via Veriforce. I would give you my direct phone number, but it just eludes me right now off the top of my head. But either one of those two ways is probably the easiest way to get in touch with me, and I welcome the conversations. I'm very active with IFMA, the International Facilities Management Association. I'm also very active in ISM, the Institute for Supply Management. So if you're at any of those conferences here pretty soon, I'm happy to connect with you at those conferences and some of the other conferences that I may be at. So reach out to me via email or reach out to me via connect to me on LinkedIn, and I look forward to a chat.
So no hate mail, no hate mail. Just to put a little disclaimer in there, because he doesn't want any hate mail. But I am going to say, if you love the risk matrix, or you don't like the risk matrix, or you don't like what we're talking about, or you do like what we're talking about, hit that like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and place your comments in there, and we will answer them. We are good at answering them. We like the discussion. And if you got some hate mail, put it in the YouTube channel, and we'll get it to Sam, and maybe he can answer your questions. I don't think you're going to get hate mail, Sam, but
we're also on Spotify. For those of you driving down the road, please do not make your comments on our YouTube channel when you're driving, but a lot of people like to listen to podcasts and to the risk matrix there on Spotify. It's great. That's where I listen to our episodes, is on Spotify when I'm traveling, and other podcasts. Come join the discussion. Thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Roll Tide. And until next time, y'all keep bringing those workers home safe from high hazard jobs.